Captain Marcus Kane stood in the cargo bay of his salvaged ship, staring at the strangest payment he'd ever received. The Zelanian merchant had been desperate to settle his debt after Marcus pulled his damaged freighter from a gravity well near the Corn Nebula. When the alien couldn't produce the agreed-upon credits, he'd offered something else entirely. "Her name is Lyra," the merchant had said, gesturing toward a small figure hunched in the corner of his ship. "She's worth more than the salvage fee. I promise you that." Now Marcus found himself studying the alien girl who sat quietly on a storage crate, her silver hair falling like liquid mercury around delicate shoulders. She was humanoid, but clearly not human, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light and large violet eyes that held depths he couldn't fathom. What struck him most was how she kept her gaze fixed on the floor, never looking directly at him or anyone else. The Zelanian merchant, a reptilian creature named Thex, had been eager to leave after the transaction. He'd handed over a small data pad with basic information about Lyra's care and feeding requirements, muttered something about humans being peculiar enough to appreciate oddities, and departed without looking back. Marcus had accepted the arrangement, partly out of curiosity and partly because he'd grown tired of traveling alone through the outer systems. His crew of one had served him well for 3 years, but the isolation was starting to wear on him. At 32, he was young for a salvage captain, but the work had aged him in ways that showed around his eyes, and in the careful way he moved, always ready for trouble. "Well," he said to Lyra, his voice gentler than usual, "I guess we should figure out how this is going to work." She lifted her head slightly, but still didn't meet his eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, and her words carried a musical quality that made the ship's recycled air seem cleaner somehow. "I'm trained in household management, basic medical care, and mechanical repair. I require minimal food and can survive on ship's rations. I will not be any trouble, Master." The word master hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard about the servant trade that flourished in some of the outer rim systems, where economic desperation drove people to sell themselves or their children into indentured service. He'd always found the practice disgusting, but he'd never been face to face with it before. "First thing," he said, crouching down to bring himself closer to her eye level, "you don't call me Master. My name is Marcus, or Captain if you prefer something formal. Second thing, you're not my property." That merchant might have thought he was trading you like cargo, but that's not how this works. Lyra's violet eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she looked directly at him. In that brief glance, Marcus saw something that made his chest tighten. Intelligence, yes, but also a wariness so deep it had become part of her nature. This wasn't someone who had chosen servitude. This was someone who had learned to survive it. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "If I am not to serve, then what purpose do I have here?" Marcus stood and ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He'd been expecting to gain a crew member, maybe someone to help with the endless maintenance his ship required. Instead, he'd inherited someone who didn't even understand the concept of personal freedom. "How about we start with getting you settled in," he said. "There's a spare cabin just down the corridor. It's not much, but it's private and it's yours." He led her through the narrow passageways of his ship, the Wandering Star. She was an old Terran-built vessel, designed for long-range operations and built to last. Marcus had modified her extensively over the years, turning her into a home as much as a workplace. The corridors were lined with salvaged artwork and curiosities he'd collected during his travels, giving the ship a personality that most commercial vessels lacked. When they reached the spare cabin, Marcus palmed the door control and gestured for Lyra to enter. The room was small but comfortable, with a bed, a storage locker, and a small desk built into the bulkhead. A viewport looked out onto the star field beyond. Lyra stepped inside and turned in a slow circle, taking in every detail. When she faced him again, confusion was written clearly across her delicate features. "This is for me?" she asked. "The entire room?" "Of course it's for you. Everyone needs their own space." She walked to the bed and touched the blanket with trembling fingers. I have not had a bed since. She stopped herself, closing her eyes briefly. Thank you, Captain. Marcus wanted to ask what she'd been about to say, but something in her posture warned him off. Instead, he showed her how to operate the room's controls, where to find fresh linens, and how to access the ship's computer terminal. The galley is 2 doors down if you get hungry, he said. And Lyra? You don't need permission to eat, or to use the facilities, or to move around the ship. This isn't a prison. After he left her to get settled, Marcus made his way to the bridge, his mind churning with questions. He activated the ship's computer and pulled up what little information Thex had provided about Lyra. The data was frustratingly sparse. No family name, no world of origin, no history beyond a notation that she had been acquired 2 years ago and had served aboard 3 different vessels since then. What bothered Marcus most was the clinical nature of the information. It read like a maintenance record for a piece of equipment, not a description of a sentient being. Whoever had originally processed Lyra into the servant trade had been very careful to erase anything that might hint at who she really was. He was deep in thought when the ship's proximity alarm chimed softly. Marcus looked up to see a consortium patrol ship on an intercept course. His jaw tightened. The Galactic Consortium officially disapproved of the servant trade, but they were notoriously corrupt and often looked the other way when credits changed hands. If they were here to check on Thex's cargo transfer, this could get complicated quickly. Marcus opened a comm channel as the patrol ship drew alongside. Wandering Star to Consortium Vessel. This is Captain Kane. What can I do for you? The reply came from a gravelly-voiced Vaxian officer. Captain Kane, this is Commander Brzek of the CNS Vigilant. We're conducting routine inspections of vessels in this sector. Prepare to be boarded. There was nothing routine about it. Marcus knew. Someone had reported the transaction with Thex, and now the Consortium wanted their cut. He'd seen this game played before in the outer systems, where official authority was thin and corruption was thick. Understood, Commander, lowering shields and extending docking umbilical. As the Consortium boarding party made their way aboard, Marcus found himself thinking about Lyra. If they decided to confiscate her as evidence of illegal trafficking, she'd disappear into the Consortium's bureaucracy and probably end up in a situation far worse than her current one. The thought made something cold and angry coil in his stomach. He met the boarding party in the main airlock. Commander Brzek was a typical Vaxian, built like a walking tank with gray skin and small, predatory eyes. Behind him stood 2 human security officers who looked like they'd be more comfortable shaking down civilians than enforcing galactic law. Captain Kane, Brzek said, his translator giving his words a mechanical quality. We've received reports of suspicious cargo transfers in this area. I'm sure you won't mind if we take a look around. Feel free, Marcus replied, keeping his voice level. Though I should mention that my ship is currently operating under Terran registry, which means you'll need proper documentation for any seizures. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. The Consortium was always careful about antagonizing Earth's government, especially over something as politically sensitive as the servant trade. Brzek's expression soured, but he nodded curtly. The inspection was thorough, but professional. The Consortium officers went through his cargo manifest, checked his navigation logs, and scanned every compartment on the ship. Marcus watched nervously as they approached Lyra's cabin, but when they palmed the door control, the room appeared empty. After 20 minutes, Brzek and his team regrouped in the cargo bay. Everything appears to be in order, the Vaxian said reluctantly. But I should warn you, Captain, that trafficking in sentient beings carries severe penalties under Consortium law. I'll keep that in mind, Marcus replied. Safe travels, Commander. After the Consortium ship departed, Marcus went looking for Lyra. He found her in the ship's workshop, squeezed into a maintenance alcove behind a bank of spare parts. She was so still that he almost missed her entirely. They're gone, he said gently. You can come out now. She emerged slowly, her violet eyes wide with fear. Were they looking for me? Probably. But they didn't find you, and they're not coming back. Lyra studied his face carefully, as if trying to read his intentions. You hid me from them. What? Marcus realized that this was a crucial moment. His answer would determine whether she began to trust him or continued to see him as just another captor with a different set of rules. Because you're not cargo, he said simply. And because I don't hand people over to the consortium unless they've done something to deserve it. Something shifted in Lyra's expression then, a subtle change that Marcus almost missed. For just a moment, the careful mask of submission slipped, and he caught a glimpse of the person underneath. There was strength there, and intelligence, and something else that looked almost like hope. I should tell you something, Captain, she said, her voice still soft but carrying a new note of determination. My previous masters, they thought I was just a simple servant girl. But I am not what I appear to be. Marcus waited for her to continue, sensing that this was important. I have skills they never discovered because I was careful never to show them. I can do things with technology that would surprise you. I chose to hide these abilities because servants who are too valuable become targets for theft or worse. What kind of abilities? Marcus asked. Instead of answering directly, Lyra moved to the workshop's main console and placed her hands on the interface panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire room hummed with energy as every system came online simultaneously. Diagnostic displays flickered to life, showing detailed readouts that Marcus had never seen before. The air recycling system, which had been running with a slight rattle for months, suddenly smoothed out to a perfect whisper. I can speak to machines, Lyra said quietly, stepping back from the console. It is a talent my people are born with, but it is also why we are sought after as servants. A Zephyrian who can interface with any technology is worth a fortune to the right buyer. Marcus stared at the transformed workshop, his mind racing. If Lyra was Zephyrian, that changed everything. The Zephyrians were one of the most advanced species in known space, masters of biotechnology and quantum engineering. They were also notoriously reclusive, rarely venturing beyond their home systems. For one to end up in the servant trade was almost unthinkable. Zephyrian, he said slowly. That explained a lot. No wonder that merchant was so eager to trade you. You're not just valuable, you're priceless. Lyra's shoulders tensed, and Marcus realized she was waiting for him to see her the way everyone else had. As a tool to be used, a resource to be exploited. But here's the thing, he continued, meeting her violet gaze steadily. I'm not interested in your market value. I'm interested in who you are as a person. If you want to use your abilities to help maintain the ship, that's your choice. If you'd rather keep them private, that's also your choice. Either way, you're not my servant, and you're not my property. You're my guest, at least until we can figure out something better. Lyra stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her struggling with concepts that were foreign to her recent experience. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. I do not remember the last time someone gave me a choice about anything. The weight of that statement settled between them like a physical presence. Marcus felt a surge of anger at whoever had stolen this remarkable being from her people and reduced her to chattel. But beneath the anger was something else, a determination that surprised him with its intensity. Well, he said, forcing his voice to stay light, you've got choices now, starting with dinner. I was planning to heat up some protein rations, but if you have any preferences, now's the time to speak up. For the first time since he'd met her, Lyra smiled. It was a small, tentative expression, but it transformed her entire face. In that moment, Marcus began to understand what Thex had meant when he'd said she was worth more than a salvage fee. Not because of her abilities or her species, but because of the person she was underneath all the conditioning and fear. As they walked toward the galley together, Marcus found himself wondering about Lyra's story. How does Zephyrian ended up so far from home? What had happened to her family, her people, and, perhaps most importantly, what was he going to do now that he'd found himself responsible for someone so extraordinary? The questions would have to wait. For now, it was enough that she was safe, that she was beginning to trust him, and that the fear in her eyes was starting to fade. Marcus had always been good at fixing broken things, and something told him that Lyra wasn't nearly as damaged as she appeared to be. She was just someone who had learned to hide her true nature in order to survive. As they prepared a simple meal together in the ship's galley, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in the space of a single day. He'd started the morning as a solitary salvage captain with a straightforward cargo run. Now he was the protector of a Zephyrian refugee whose abilities could revolutionize space travel if they fell into the wrong hands. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead, Marcus found himself looking forward to whatever came next. For the first time in years, he wasn't traveling alone, and his ship felt less like a workplace and more like a home. 3 weeks into their journey together, Marcus discovered that having Lyra aboard was like living with a miracle he was only beginning to understand. Every day brought new revelations about what she could accomplish when she felt safe enough to reveal her true capabilities. The first major surprise came when they encountered a derelict research station drifting in the Helix sector. Marcus had planned a standard salvage operation, but the station's computer systems had been damaged by solar radiation, making it impossible to access the valuable data cores inside. "I might be able to help with that," Lyra had said quietly as they suited up for the EVA. "If you trust me to try." Trust. The word had become important between them over the past few weeks. Marcus had been careful to ask for her opinion on everything from navigation routes to meal choices, slowly helping her understand that her thoughts and preferences mattered. In return, Lyra had begun to share glimpses of the remarkable mind that had been hidden beneath years of enforced servitude. Inside the research station, Marcus watched in amazement as Lyra approached the dead computer core. She removed her gloves and placed her bare hands on the darkened interface panels. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft blue glow began emanating from her skin where it touched the metal. The station's lights flickered to life around them. Emergency systems hummed back to functionality. Most remarkably, data streams began flowing across displays that had been black and lifeless moments before. "The quantum substrate is still intact," Lyra murmured, her eyes closed in concentration. "I can bridge the damaged pathways with my own bioelectric field. Give me a few minutes to establish a stable connection." Marcus had seen plenty of advanced technology in his years as a salvager, but this was something entirely different. Lyra wasn't using tools or interfaces. She was becoming part of the station's computer network, her nervous system somehow compatible with artificial intelligence systems in ways that defied everything he thought he knew about biology and technology. When she finally stepped back, every system on the station was running perfectly. More importantly, she'd managed to extract terabytes of research data that would have been lost forever without her intervention. "The data includes breakthrough research on quantum tunneling drives," she said, pulling her gloves back on. "This could be worth millions on the right market." Marcus studied her face, noting the slight pallor that suggested the effort had cost her something. "Are you all right?" That looked intense. "I am fine," she replied, though her voice carried a note of exhaustion. "My people evolved this ability over millions of years. Our homeworld required constant interface with biotechnological systems for survival. What seems impossible to other species is as natural as breathing for us." As they returned to the wandering star with their prize, Marcus found himself thinking about the implications. If Lyra could resurrect dead computer systems with a touch, what else might she be capable of? And, more troubling, what would happen if the wrong people discovered her abilities? His questions were answered sooner than he'd hoped. 2 days later, as they approached the Freeport station to sell the research data, the ship's long-range sensors detected 3 vessels moving to intercept them. Marcus recognized the configuration immediately and felt his blood turn to ice. "Slavers," he said, keying the intercom to Lyra's cabin. 3 Korthak Raider ships moving fast. They're jamming our communications, which means they don't want anyone to know we're here." Lyra appeared on the bridge within seconds, her violet eyes wide with fear. "They're here for me?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Has to be. Someone talked. Probably that merchant who traded you to me." The court hacks specialize in hunting down high-value individuals for the slave markets. The Korthak Syndicate was one of the most feared criminal organizations in the galaxy. They were known for their brutality and their sophisticated intelligence networks. If they'd learned about Lyra's true nature, they wouldn't give up easily. "What do we do?" Lyra asked, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Marcus was already plotting jump coordinates. "We run. The Wandering Star is fast, but those raiders are built for pursuit. We're going to need every advantage we can get." He engaged the ship's emergency acceleration, feeling the artificial gravity compensator strain to keep up with the sudden increase in velocity. Behind them, the Korthak ships responded by spreading into a pursuit formation designed to cut off escape routes. "They're faster than us," Lyra observed, studying the tactical display. "In a straight line, yes," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing over the navigation controls. "But this ship has been modified for salvage work in hazardous environments. I know a few tricks they probably don't expect." He banked the ship toward the Corin Nebula, a region of space notorious for its unstable gravitational fields and radiation storms. Most pilots avoided the area entirely, but Marcus had spent years learning to navigate its hidden channels and relatively safe corridors. The first Korthak ship followed them into the nebula without hesitation, its pilot either supremely confident or supremely stupid. The other two vessels hung back, waiting to see what would happen. What happened was that Marcus led the pursuing raider directly into a gravitational anomaly that caught the ship like a fly in amber. The Korthak vessel found itself trapped in a stable orbit around a micro black hole, its engines unable to generate enough thrust to break free. "One down," Marcus muttered, adjusting course toward a region of the nebula where sensor interference would make them hard to track. But the remaining court hacks were learning. Instead of following directly, they began a methodical sweep pattern designed to flush out their prey. It was a sound strategy, and Marcus realized it was only a matter of time before they were found. "There has to be another way," Lyra said, studying the tactical readouts with an expression of fierce concentration. "I'm open to suggestions," Marcus replied, banking sharply to avoid a plasma storm. "Unless you can make this ship invisible, we're going to have to fight our way out. And these raiders have enough firepower to turn us into scrap metal." Lyra was quiet for several moments, her violet eyes distant. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of determination that Marcus had never heard before. "I cannot make the ship invisible," she said slowly, "but I might be able to do something better. Captain, how much do you trust me?" Marcus looked at her, taking in the steady gaze and the set of her shoulders. This wasn't the frightened servant girl he'd met 3 weeks ago. This was someone who had found her strength again. "Completely," he said without hesitation. Lyra moved to the ship's primary computer interface and placed her hands on the control surface. The bridge lighting dimmed as power flowed through systems that Marcus didn't even know existed. "I'm going to attempt something that has never been tried before," she said, her voice taking on the musical quality that always accompanied her deepest concentration. "I'm going to merge my consciousness temporarily with the ship's computer, expanding its capabilities beyond normal parameters." Marcus felt the ship shudder around them as Lyra's unique abilities interfaced with the Wandering Star's systems. Displays lit up with information streams that flowed too fast for human comprehension. The engine efficiency readings climbed to levels that should have been impossible. Most remarkably, Marcus began to feel as though the ship itself was aware of their situation. The artificial gravity adjusted automatically to counteract his movements before he made them. Course corrections happened smoothly, as if the vessel was anticipating his commands. "I can see them," Lyra whispered, her eyes closed but her face tilted toward the main display. "Two ships, closing on our position from different vectors. Their targeting computers are active. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, Marcus could suddenly perceive the raiders with crystal clarity. He could see their weapon systems, their power distributions, even the stress patterns in their hull plating. It was like having a tactical awareness that extended far beyond normal human limits. Their lead ship has a weakness, Lyra continued. Her voice strangely doubled, as if speaking through the ship's communication system. A flaw in the port engine coupling that makes it vulnerable to resonance feedback. Marcus didn't fully understand what she meant, but he trusted her completely. Following her guidance, he targeted a specific frequency pulse at the Korthak Raider. The beam struck what appeared to be heavily armored plating, but the results were devastating. The Raider's engine section erupted in a cascade of explosions that left the ship drifting powerless. The remaining Korthak ship immediately broke off its attack and retreated to long range. Its captain was clearly having second thoughts about pursuing prey that could destroy his ships with apparent ease. As the immediate threat receded, Lyra slowly withdrew from her connection with the ship systems. When she opened her eyes, Marcus was startled to see tears running down her cheeks. "Are you hurt?" he asked, moving to her side with concern. "No," she said softly, "I am not hurt." For a moment there, I felt what it was like to be truly free. To use my abilities without fear, without hiding what I could do. I had forgotten how that felt. Marcus helped her to a chair, noting that she seemed physically drained by the effort. "What you just did, is that normal for your people?" Lyra shook her head. Interface consciousness is rare even among Zephyrians. Perhaps 1 in a million is born with the ability. It was why I was taken from my homeworld. Collectors pay enormous sums for individuals with unique capabilities. The pieces were starting to come together in Marcus's mind. Someone specifically targeted you. This wasn't random. No, Lyra confirmed. There was a consortium research station near Zephyr Prime. They had been studying our people for months, identifying individuals with special abilities. I was selected for capture because my talent was deemed particularly valuable. Marcus felt anger building in his chest like a physical heat. The Galactic Consortium presented itself as a force for order and justice in the galaxy, but corruption ran through the organization like a cancer. The idea that official research stations were being used to identify targets for the slave trade made him want to punch something. "How long ago was this?" he asked. 3 years, Lyra replied. "I have been passed from owner to owner ever since, my abilities exploited by people who saw me as nothing more than a valuable tool." 3 years. Marcus tried to imagine what that must have been like for someone accustomed to freedom and respect among her own people. No wonder she'd been so careful to hide her true capabilities. In the wrong hands, her abilities would make her the most sought-after slave in the galaxy. "Well," he said firmly, "that ends now. We're going to find a way to get you home." Lyra looked at him with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with disbelief. "You would do that? Even knowing what I am worth on the black market?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Especially knowing what you're worth. The galaxy is a dangerous place for people with unique abilities. But your true value isn't in what you can do for others. It's in who you are as a person." As they continued their journey toward Freeport Station, Marcus found himself planning beyond their immediate needs. Selling the research data would provide enough credits to outfit the ship for a long journey to the outer systems where Zephyr Prime was located. But getting there safely would require careful planning and probably some help from allies he'd cultivated over the years. More immediately, he needed to think about security. The attack by the Korthak Raiders proved that word of Lyra's abilities was spreading through the criminal underworld. There would be others probably better equipped and more determined than the slavers they'd just defeated. "Captain," Lyra said quietly, interrupting his thoughts, "I want you to know that whatever happens, these past few weeks have been the first time in 3 years that I have felt like a person rather than property. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." Marcus looked at her, seeing not the frightened servant girl from their first meeting, but a remarkable individual who had survived unimaginable hardship and retained her essential humanity. Her abilities were extraordinary, but it was her strength of character that truly impressed him. "You didn't lose anything," he said. "It was just hidden for a while. The person you really are was always there, waiting for a chance to emerge." As the wandering star approached Freeport Station, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since accepting Lyra as payment for a salvage job. He'd thought he was gaining a crew member, but instead he'd found himself responsible for protecting one of the most remarkable individuals he'd ever encountered. The challenges ahead would be significant. Getting Lyra home safely would require navigating both criminal syndicates and potentially corrupt official channels. But Marcus found himself looking forward to the journey. For the first time in years, he was part of something larger than himself, something that mattered. And if he was honest with himself, the prospect of seeing Zephyr Prime and learning more about Lyra's remarkable people was almost as appealing as the satisfaction of helping her reclaim her freedom. The galaxy was full of wonders, but few were as extraordinary as the person sitting beside him, quietly planning their next move with the kind of strategic thinking that came from surviving the unthinkable. The journey to Zephyr Prime took 6 weeks, during which Marcus learned that traveling with a Zephyrian was like having the universe's most advanced technical manual come to life. Lyra's growing confidence in her abilities transformed the wandering star from a capable salvage vessel into something approaching a miracle of engineering. She optimized the fusion reactor to run at 98% efficiency, a level that should have been theoretically impossible. The navigation computer began calculating jump coordinates with precision that eliminated the usual margin of error entirely. Most impressively, she somehow convinced the ship's artificial intelligence to evolve beyond its original programming, developing what appeared to be genuine intuition about mechanical problems before they occurred. "Your people built this ship well," Lyra observed one morning as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr system. "Human engineering has a quality that many species lack. You build things to last, and you build them to be repaired. It shows respect for both the materials and the people who will use them." Marcus was busy studying the sensor readouts, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Speaking of human engineering, we may have a problem. I'm reading at least 50 ships in this system, and most of them are carrying military-grade weapons. The Zephyr system was supposed to be neutral territory, protected by ancient treaties and monitored by automated defense platforms. Instead, Marcus found himself looking at what appeared to be a military occupation in progress. Consortium vessels, Korthak raiders, and ships from half a dozen other factions were spread throughout the system in a tense standoff. "They are all here for the same reason," Lyra said quietly, her violet eyes fixed on the tactical display. "My people's homeworld has been blockaded. Someone is preventing the Zephyrians from leaving the system, and others have come to claim what they consider valuable cargo." The situation was worse than Marcus had imagined. Instead of returning Lyra to safety, he'd brought her into the middle of a potential war zone. Every faction in the galaxy that dealt in exotic technology or rare individuals had apparently decided that Zephyr Prime was worth fighting over. "We should leave," he said, his hand hovering over the jump controls. "This is too dangerous." "No." Lyra's voice carried a note of steel that Marcus had never heard before. "My people are trapped down there. If I run now, I will spend the rest of my life knowing I could have helped them and chose safety instead." Marcus studied her face, seeing the determination there. This wasn't the frightened servant girl he'd rescued. This was someone who had rediscovered her courage and was prepared to use it. "All right," he said, settling back in his chair. "But we do this smart. No heroic charges into impossible odds. We gather intelligence first, then we make a plan. Using the ship's enhanced sensors and Lyra's ability to interface with distant computer systems, they began mapping the situation in the system. What they discovered was deeply troubling. The various factions weren't fighting each other yet, but they were all positioning for something. The consortium had established a perimeter around Zephyr Prime, officially calling it a protective quarantine, but effectively preventing anyone from leaving. "It's a harvest operation," Marcus realized with growing disgust. "They're going to strip the planet of anyone with valuable abilities and divide them up among the various buyers." Lyra's hands clenched into fists. "My people are not cargo to be traded. We are scientists, artists, philosophers. We have contributed immeasurably to galactic civilization, and this is how we are repaid. Through careful scanning, they identified the key players in the blockade. Commander Brzek's ship, the CNS Vigilant, was serving as the command vessel for the consortium forces. Several Korthak raiders were providing muscle and intimidation. Most surprisingly, there were also ships from the Terran Defense Force, Marcus's own people, apparently lending legitimacy to the operation. "I don't understand," Marcus said, studying the human ships with confusion. "Earth officially opposes the slave trade. Why would TDF vessels be involved in this?" Lyra was quiet for several moments, her expression thoughtful. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of sad understanding. "Because they have been told this is a rescue operation," she said. "The consortium is very skilled at presenting their crimes as humanitarian efforts. Your people probably believe they're saving Zephyrians from some terrible danger. The manipulation was sophisticated and effective. By framing the blockade as protection rather than imprisonment, the consortium had gained international support for what was essentially a massive kidnapping operation." Marcus felt sick thinking about how many good people were being used as unwitting tools for something so evil. "We need to get word to the TDF ships," he said. "If they knew what was really happening here, they'd switch sides in a heartbeat." "Getting their attention will not be easy," Lyra pointed out. "All communications are being monitored and filtered through consortium channels." Marcus was studying the tactical display when an idea began forming in his mind. It was dangerous, probably insane, and would require perfect timing. But it might be their only chance to expose what was really happening here. "Can you access the consortium's communication network from here?" he asked. Lyra nodded slowly. "If we get closer, yes. But they will detect any unauthorized access almost immediately." "How long would you need to upload a data package to every ship in the system simultaneously?" "Perhaps 30 seconds, if the package is prepared in advance." "But, Captain, that would be like declaring war on the entire blockade. They would destroy us before we could escape." Marcus was already calculating vectors and timing. "Not if we do it right. I'm going to create the biggest distraction this system has ever seen, and while everyone's attention is focused elsewhere, you're going to tell them the truth about what's happening here." Over the next several hours, they prepared for what Marcus privately thought of as the most elaborate suicide mission in galactic history. Lyra compiled evidence of the consortium's true intentions, including recorded conversations, financial records, and documentation of similar operations on other worlds. Meanwhile, Marcus rigged every non-essential system on the ship to overload simultaneously, creating what would appear to be a catastrophic reactor failure. "This plan requires precise timing," Lyra warned as they approached the inner system. "If I begin the upload too early, they will jam our transmission. Too late, and they will destroy us before the data transfer is complete." "Trust me," Marcus said, his hands steady on the controls despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "I've been in tighter spots than this." They approached the blockade perimeter, flying a distress signal, claiming engine trouble and requesting assistance. It was a calculated risk, banking on the fact that even corrupt officials were reluctant to be seen ignoring humanitarian emergencies. The response came from Commander Brzek himself. "Wandering Star, this is CNS Vigilant. You are in a restricted area. State your business in this system." "Vigilant, we're experiencing cascade failures in our primary systems," Marcus replied, allowing genuine stress to color his voice. "Requesting permission to make emergency repairs before attempting to leave the system." There was a long pause before Brzek responded. "Permission granted. Proceed to Asteroid Belt Station 7 for temporary repairs. Be advised that any deviation from your assigned course will be considered a hostile act." Marcus acknowledged the transmission and began following the directed route, all the while watching the tactical display as ships throughout the system tracked their movement. When they reached the precise position he'd calculated, he gave Lyra a nod. "Now!" Lyra placed her hands on the communication console as Marcus triggered every overload he'd prepared. The Wandering Star erupted in spectacular fashion, electrical discharges arcing across her hull as system after system appeared to suffer catastrophic failure. Emergency beacons activated automatically, broadcasting distress signals that demanded immediate response under galactic salvage law. In the confusion that followed, as ships throughout the blockade scrambled to respond to what appeared to be a ship in distress, Lyra uploaded her data package to every vessel in the system. Military networks, civilian communications arrays, even the personal devices of individual crew members received detailed evidence of the consortium's slave harvesting operation. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On the TDF ships, officers who had believed they were protecting civilians suddenly found themselves confronted with evidence that they were actually enabling their enslavement. Several vessels immediately broke formation and demanded explanations from their consortium counterparts. All ships, this is Admiral Richardson aboard the TDS Constitution, came a broadcast on the general emergency frequency. I want answers about these allegations, and I want them now. Any consortium vessel that attempts to leave the system before this is resolved will be considered hostile. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the careful alliance holding the blockade together begin to fracture. The Terran ships were repositioning to prevent anyone from fleeing, while the various criminal factions were clearly reconsidering their participation in an operation that had suddenly become public knowledge. The upload was successful, Lyra reported, though her voice was strained from the effort of coordinating so many simultaneous transmissions. Every ship in the system has received the complete evidence package. But their victory came at a cost. The spectacular failure of the ship's systems hadn't been entirely faked, and several critical components had actually been damaged by the overloads. The wandering star was genuinely crippled now, drifting helplessly as her power systems struggled to maintain basic life support. "We have a problem," Marcus said, studying the damage reports. "The fusion reactor is offline, and I can't restart it remotely. Someone's going to have to go EVA and manually reset the containment field." Lyra was already moving toward the equipment lockers. "I can interface directly with the reactor control systems. It will be faster than trying to repair them conventionally." Marcus caught her arm gently. "That's incredibly dangerous. If something goes wrong while you're connected to a fusion reactor, the feedback could kill you." She met his gaze steadily. "My people are still trapped on that planet. I will not let them down because I was afraid of some personal risk." Before Marcus could object further, proximity alarms began chiming. 3 ships were approaching their position, moving fast and with obvious hostile intent. Marcus recognized them immediately as Korthak raiders, probably hoping to capture Lyra in the confusion. "Change of plans," he said grimly, moving to the ship's weapon controls. "I'll handle our uninvited guests. You focus on getting our power back online." The next few minutes were among the most intense of Marcus's life. With the ship's systems running on backup power and many of his weapons offline, he found himself fighting a desperate defensive action against opponents who outgunned him significantly. Meanwhile, Lyra worked frantically to restore the fusion reactor, her unique abilities allowing her to bypass damaged control circuits and interface directly with the reactor's quantum containment systems. Through the chaos of the battle, Marcus could hear reports flooding in over the emergency channels. The evidence Lyra had distributed was having exactly the effect they'd hoped for. Consortium commanders were being arrested by their own crews. Criminal vessels were fleeing the system as fast as their engines could carry them. Most importantly, the TDF ships were demanding immediate access to Zephyr Prime to verify the condition of the civilian population. "Reactor online," Lyra announced, and Marcus felt the ship's systems surge back to full power just as one of the Korthak raiders lined up for a killing shot. The enhanced capabilities Lyra had given his ship proved decisive. With full power restored and her unique improvements active, the Wandering Star outmaneuvered and outgunned opponents that should have been far superior. The battle ended with 2 raiders destroyed, and the 3rd fleeing toward the system's edge. As the immediate threat faded, Marcus found himself looking at a completely transformed situation. The blockade had collapsed entirely, with consortium ships either under arrest or fleeing in disgrace. The Terran Defense Force was coordinating with Zephyrian authorities to establish proper diplomatic contact. Most importantly, ships were beginning to arrive from Zephyr Prime itself, carrying the planet's legitimate representatives to restore order to their system. "We did it," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "My people are free." Marcus watched the tactical display as Zephyrian vessels moved to reclaim their own space. The ships were unlike anything he'd ever seen, seeming to flow through space rather than simply traveling through it. Even at a distance, he could sense the same harmonious integration of biology and technology that made Lyra so remarkable. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now I go home," she replied, but there was something in her voice that suggested the answer wasn't as simple as it sounded. Over the next several hours, they were approached by a Zephyrian diplomatic vessel. The beings who came aboard were clearly related to Lyra, sharing her distinctive silver hair and violet eyes, but there was something about them that seemed more ethereal, as if they existed partially in dimensions Marcus couldn't perceive. The reunion was emotional, but brief. Lyra's family had believed her dead for 3 years, and the joy of seeing her alive was tempered by the knowledge of what she had endured. They spoke in their own language, a musical communication that seemed to convey meaning on multiple levels simultaneously. When the conversation ended, Lyra turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "My people are grateful for what you have done," she said. "They wish to offer you a reward. Name anything within our power to grant, and it will be yours." Marcus considered the offer carefully. The Zephyrians were among the most advanced species in the galaxy. They could probably provide him with technology that would make him the richest human alive, or knowledge that would advance his species by centuries. "I don't want a reward," he said finally. "Helping you is the right thing to do. That's reward enough." Lyra studied his face carefully. "You continue to surprise me, Marcus Kane. Most beings would take advantage of such an offer." "I'm not most beings," he replied. "Besides, I got everything I wanted out of this. You're safe, your people are free, and the galaxy is a little bit more just than it was yesterday." But as the diplomatic vessel prepared to depart with Lyra aboard, Marcus felt an unexpected pang of loss. Over the past several weeks, he'd grown accustomed to having her brilliant mind and remarkable abilities as part of his daily life. More than that, he'd come to value her friendship and respect her courage. "Captain," Lyra said as she prepared to leave, "I have a question for you. What if I chose not to return to Zephyr Prime immediately? What if I wanted to continue traveling with you for a while longer?" Marcus looked at her in surprise. "You want to stay? Your family just got you back." "My family understands that I have changed during my time away," she replied. "I'm not the same person who was taken from our homeworld 3 years ago. I have seen things and done things that make it impossible to simply return to my old life. I need time to decide who I want to become." Marcus felt something warm and hopeful unfurl in his chest. "The offer stands. You'll always have a place on my ship for as long as you want it." Lyra smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "Then I choose to stay, at least for now. The galaxy is vast, and there are many wrongs that need to be righted. Perhaps we can find a few more of them together." As the Zephyrian diplomatic ship departed with messages for Lyra's family, Marcus found himself looking forward to whatever adventures lay ahead. The wandering star was faster, smarter, and more capable than ever before, thanks to Lyra's modifications. More importantly, he was no longer traveling alone. "So," he said as they plotted a course for the outer systems, "any preferences on where we go first?" Lyra studied the star charts with the intense focus he'd come to associate with her deeper thoughts. "I've been thinking about the research station where the consortium was studying my people. It would be interesting to discover what other information they might have gathered and about whom." Marcus grinned. "A little liberation of illegally obtained intelligence. I like it. Besides, someone should make sure that data doesn't fall into the wrong hands." as the wandering star jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward their next adventure. Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd started as a simple salvage captain, content to work alone and avoid complicated entanglements. Now he found himself part of a partnership that was already changing the galaxy in small but significant ways. The merchant who had traded Lyra to settle a debt had described her as worth more than the salvage fee. He'd been right, but not in the way he'd imagined. Her true value wasn't in her remarkable abilities or her species' advanced technology. It was in her courage, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Marcus had thought he was accepting payment for a completed job. Instead, he found something far more precious than credits or salvage rights. He'd found a friend, a partner, and a purpose that gave meaning to his travels through the endless dark between the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of wonders waiting to be discovered. With Lyra beside him, Marcus felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, when you traveled with someone who could speak to machines and reshape reality with her thoughts, the impossible became merely improbable. And Marcus had always enjoyed good odds, even when they didn't appear to be in his favor.